Where is everyone? Nice to see everyone. It's great to have a Shabbat of Smachot. Smachot is the plural of Simcha, of happy occasions. And it's wonderful to celebrate with Phil and Aliyah and baby Miriam. And as Rabbi Kling-Perkins just announced her name, it's great to celebrate with Mark and Johanna. And it's great to celebrate with the Heberts and with the extended, with their extended families, the Hebert and Levitt families. Mazal Tov. I'm going to go back a little bit in time, back to 1984, not the book, but the actual year. I was a teenager back in 1984, and I remember being very excited that Geraldine Ferraro was nominated as vice president of the United States. Now, it didn't quite work out so well for her and her running mate, Walter Mondale. In case you forgot what happened, they lost in a pretty big landslide. I think only his Mondale's home state of Minnesota was the only thing that he got. I think Mark Drury could fill me in on that, but I think that's what happened. But I remember thinking it was a good sign that women were on the ascendancy, and I kind of thought that more women would get nominated and things would move along a little bit faster. I guess it took a little bit more time. There were many girls in my high school class, even though it was a liberal Orthodox yeshiva. There were many girls in my class who were leaders. In fact, the four brightest students in my grade were young women. But it did take another 24 years until another woman would be our nominee, or a nominee rather, for vice president. And then it would take 8 more years before Hillary Clinton almost broke the glass ceiling, losing the election for president, although she did win the popular vote by more than 2.8 million votes. But now we have a woman in Kamala Harris elected as our next vice president. And I cannot tell you how excited I am. Forget the politics and if you are a Democrat, Republican, or independent. I'm just thinking about her and what she brings to the position. She brings many firsts. She's the first woman. She's the first African American woman. She's the first person of Indian descent. And as you can imagine, women naturally bring a different perspective to leadership than men. And it is one that humanity has not been listening to enough, in my estimation. Now, for me as a leader, it's critical to have women on my leadership team. And I turn to them to be my partners and my thought leaders, guiding me and bringing me perspectives and ideas that I may not have considered. For much of human history, much of the narrative has been dictated by men. And that's not been all bad, but it certainly hasn't been all good. And it certainly has been pretty one-sided and pretty incomplete. It is long overdue to remedy this. Kamala Harris's election is the next step in remedying this. Now, in my life, having a mother who was a strong leader, one who rose to the highest ranks of power in her career and in her institution, taught me that men and women are truly equal. But over the years, I've come to realize that all of that is still very fragile. Those gains can just slip away. One decade's gains can vanish in the next decade. One generation's hard-fought advancements can easily be whittled away by those who do not want to see women in positions of power, or by systems of power that continue to suppress women's voices. Egalitarianism is not something to be taken for granted. Our Parsha, Parashat Toldot, begins a trilogy about our ancestor Jacob. 3 Torah portions about our central forefather. This week he's born. He's named Yaakov, which means heel. Of course, not exactly the best name to name someone. And of course, he acts like one, swindling his brother out of his birthright for a steep price, 1/3 of his father's estate. That's a pretty steep price for a cup of soup. And deceiving his elderly father to steal his brother's blessing. Next week, the trickster will get deceived and he'll get tricked. And then it will all culminate in the 3rd installment, but I don't want to give it all away, so you tune in for next week's episodes here. But in actuality, this week's episode, the main protagonist of the Parsha is not Jacob. It is not Yaakov at all. It is his mother, Rivka, Rebecca, who is the central actor. She's driving the plot. And given when this text was written, excuse me, which was of course thousands of years ago, we can appreciate that our Parsha and the way it presents her was a revolution in women's rights for its time. Now let's take a closer look at the text. First, while the Parsha says, Eila Toldot Yitzchak, these are the generations of Isaac, it immediately turns to Rebecca. She runs the family, undertaking the task of determining how God's choice of who will be the next leader in the family will be enacted. She's the one who ensures that God's blessings should go the way that the divine tells her that they should. Of course, while Isaac has the formal authority to bless, she's the one who chooses who will get blessed in the final verdict, substituting one son for the other against her husband's wishes. She is the real power behind the throne. But it's not just that. Listen carefully to how the Parsha opens. We are actually given an insight into how Rebecca is thinking. That's something that's rarely done with men, let alone women in the biblical narrative. As she feels the pain of her twins pressed against each other and pressed against her womb, she thinks to herself, Lama ze anochi? If this is so, why do I exist? She's saying, why am I suffering like this? She says to herself. This demonstrates a real ability to be self-reflective. It's a kind of unusual quality among most biblical characters, male or female. And then things get even more remarkable as she then seeks out the divine for assistance. As the Torah relates, Vatelech lidrosh et Adonai. She went to inquire of Adonai. Now, what exactly does this mean? It's not perfectly clear. Many of the classical rabbinic commentaries tried to play this down, claiming that, well, Rebecca did not have a direct experience of God, that it was some kind of mediated experience. But that's not my reading of the words. It says it straight up. She went to inquire of God. And wouldn't you know it? God answers her, telling her that she has 2 nations in her womb. There are other mothers in the Tanakh, in the Hebrew Bible, who are told of their sons' futures, including Hagar and Samson's mother. But it is still striking how much information, inside information, she is given, which her husband Isaac is never told. She knows what has to be done, and she drives the entire narrative. when viewed through that lens, her behavior appears to be maybe a little less problematic than it is seen at first glance. She's not simply a parent playing favorites, but someone who's been given a glimpse into the divine will, and she's doing her best to carry out this cosmic plan, as strange as that might sound to our modern ears. Fascinatingly, the spotlight does not leave her even as she gives birth. As the Torah states in most rare form, when the time came for her to give birth, lo, she had twins in her belly. Again, the focus is on her experience of childbirth, a fairly infrequent occurrence in ancient texts, which were dominated by the male experience. Later on in the Parsha, Rebekah is, as we know, the main driver of the action when Jacob has to trick Isaac for a special blessing. She overhears Isaac tell Esav to prepare the special barbecue that he loves. And then after Rebekah shares the intel with Jacob, she conceives of a plan. And then when her son Jacob says, I don't know about this, she's the one who convinces him that if he gets caught, quote, any curse that you will get will be on me, my son. So just listen to me. She's quite a mother. She is quite a woman. And she is quite a leader. Where Isaac is pretty quiet, pretty timid, kind of weak, she is strong, powerful, and forceful. Without her, the covenant would not have continued properly. She is the missing link between Abraham and Jacob. In my mind, the list of major leaders should go Elohei Avraham, Elohei Rivka, Elohei Yaakov, Abraham, Rebekah, and Jacob. Now, of course, since we're an egalitarian congregation where we list all 7 of the patriarchs and matriarchs, this gets covered over. But I think you get the point. We should appreciate how radical this was for 3,700 years ago when this narrative took place, and for some 2,600 years ago when it was written down. Women have held the highest positions in Judaism in leadership, though sporadically. Think of Miriam, Moses' sister, playing a prominent role. Think of Deborah, a judge 3,100 years ago. And of course, we can think about more recently, Golda Meir, serving as prime minister of the modern state of Israel about a half century ago. And I'll share with great pride that my own mother was vice chancellor of the Jewish Theological Seminary 30 years ago, the first woman to reach that rank in the history of Jewish religious life. And now this summer, Dr. Shuli Rubin Schwartz became the first woman chancellor of JTS. So these glass ceilings are finally breaking all around us. And so we should all be thankful that women are reaching the highest positions of power. And now our daughters can be as powerful as Rebekah in the Torah. Having a role model like Kamala or Rebekah is a game changer, not just for those who see their identity directly reflected in her, but for all of us. May Kamala be blessed as Sarah, Rebekah, Rachel, and Leah. Shabbat Shalom.